The sound came first. Not the rumble of a few motorcycles, but hundreds. The kind of thunder that makes windows rattle and dogs hide. Zora Washington wheeled herself to her front door and froze. 350 Mongols bikers had surrounded her home, their leather cuts gleaming in the California sun, their faces promising violence. All because yesterday she'd given a bottle of water to a dying man who wore the wrong patch. What would you do if an army of the world's most dangerous bikers came for you? Run, beg, pray? This isn't some Hollywood movie. This happened on a Tuesday afternoon in Montebello, California, to a black girl paralyzed from the waist down who made one choice: to be kind when everyone else looked away. One bottle of water handed to a HELLS angel in Mongols territory. That's all it took to bring hell to her doorstep. I need you to hit subscribe right now, because what happened next will make you question everything you think you know about courage, about mercy, about what happens when ordinary decency collides with a world built on blood and territory. Have you ever been punished for doing the right thing? That moment when kindness becomes a crime? Tell me in the comments, because Zora's story is about to change how you see the power of a single act of compassion. When the Mongols' president stepped onto her lawn and told her they were going to burn the yard down, Zora didn't cry. She didn't beg. From her wheelchair, she looked him in the eye and said something that stopped 350 hardened bikers in their tracks. Then, just when death seemed certain, the impossible happened. The HELLS angels arrived, outnumbered 15-1, ready to die for a girl who'd given nothing but water to a stranger. Two deadly rivals, one disabled girl caught between them, and a showdown that would rewrite the rules of their violent world. This isn't just a story about motorcycle clubs. This is about what happens when someone with every reason to be afraid chooses courage instead. When someone who can't physically stand becomes the only one standing for what's right. So settle in and prepare yourself. I'm about to take you to that sun-scorched street where a girl in a wheelchair taught America's most feared men what real strength looks like. But first, smash that like button if you believe one person's courage can change everything. Because after you hear what Zora Washington did on that porch, you'll never look at your own power to change the world the same way again. Zora Washington wasn't born in a wheelchair. She'd spent the first 3 years of her life running, climbing, and dancing across her family's small Montebello home with the unstoppable energy of any toddler. But memories fade. Now, at 17, those first steps felt more like stories she'd been told, rather than moments she'd lived. Some people are handed their challenges all at once, her mother used to say. The car accident that shattered Zora's spine had delivered hers in an instant. But Tamara Washington had refused to let her daughter see the chair as anything but a detail, like having brown eyes or being right-handed. It wasn't who she was. It was just how she moved through the world. The single-story beige house on Maple Street wasn't much to look at from the outside. What made it special was invisible to passers-by. The widened doorways, the lowered countertops in the kitchen, the bathroom carefully redesigned for independence, and of course, the ramp leading to the front porch, the one her father had built himself, working nights after his shift at the auto plant, sanding each board until it was smooth as silk under her wheels. Zora's room faced east, catching the morning sun that filtered through her collection of prisms hanging in the window. When light hit them just right, her walls danced with rainbows. She'd arranged her space for maximum efficiency. Bed at the perfect height for transfers, desk with her sketching supplies, and bookshelves filled with engineering texts and novels. Most people saw the chair first, and Zora second. But anyone who spent more than 5 minutes with her quickly forgot about the wheels. What stayed with you were her eyes, deep brown and unnervingly perceptive, missing nothing, and her laugh, which started as a quiet chuckle before building into something that filled rooms and made strangers smile without knowing why. At school, Zora was known for 3 things: Her straight A average in advanced math and physics, her lightning-quick sketches of accessibility improvements for public buildings, and her startling ability to diffuse tensions with a few well-chosen words. In a high school landscape divided by invisible boundaries of race, class, and cliques, Zora moved between worlds with unusual ease. "People underestimate you," she'd once explained to her best friend Mia. "When they see the chair, they think helpless. It's annoying, but sometimes it's useful. You hear things. You notice things. People talk around you like you're furniture." Her daily routine had a rhythm all its own. Waking before dawn to avoid rushing, she'd transfer to her chair with practiced movements, dress quickly, and wheel into the kitchen to make breakfast, often for her father too, who worked late shifts. The bus with the wheelchair lift would arrive at 7:15. The driver, Mr. Castillo, always greeting her with the same joke about her being his most punctual passenger. Afternoons after school, you'd find Zora on her porch, especially in summer. The Washington house sat on a corner lot with a view down both streets. From this vantage point, she'd sketch designs or read while observing the neighborhood's comings and goings. The succulents lining her porch railing required minimal care, but gave her endless pleasure, life thriving with just the essentials. It was from this porch that Zora had witnessed more than most realized. The Sanders family's midnight move to escape creditors, old Mrs. Garcia's grandson stealing her medication, the Rivera kids' carefully hidden hunger when their father lost his job. Zora saw it all, and when possible, she acted, anonymously arranging for groceries to be delivered, accidentally ordering too much pizza and sharing it, finding ways to help that preserve dignity. Her mother had taught her that before her passing 5 years ago. Tamara Washington had been a community organizer, a woman whose kitchen table was always open to neighbors in need. "Kindness isn't about choosing who deserves it," she'd tell Zora. "It's about choosing who you want to be. And that choice, baby girl, is the only real freedom any of us have." On the anniversary of her mother's death each year, Zora and her father would sit on the porch swing, custom-built to accommodate her chair. They'd drink sweet tea and share memories of Tamara, her laugh that started soft and built like a wave, her habit of humming while cooking, the way she could quiet a room full of arguing community board members with just a raised eyebrow. "Your mama saw the world clear," her father would say, his voice rough with emotion. "She didn't just see what was broken. She saw how it could be fixed." Zora had inherited that vision. Where others saw problems, she saw solutions waiting to be designed. Her sketchbooks were filled with ramps that didn't look like afterthoughts, handles that worked for all hand sizes, spaces that welcomed everyone without announcing their accommodations. The neighborhood had changed over the years. Families moved in and out. The corner store changed owners twice. And in recent years, the distant rumble of motorcycles had become more common as territorial disputes between rival clubs spilled into once quiet suburbs. But through it all, the Washington house remained a constant. The beige paint refreshed every few years, the ramp maintained meticulously, the porch a place of observation and occasional intervention. What no one in the neighborhood could have guessed was how Zora's quiet presence on that porch would soon thrust her into the center of a confrontation between the two most dangerous motorcycle clubs in Southern California, or how the simple values her mother had taught her would be tested in ways that would make most adults crumble. But that's exactly what happened on a Tuesday in September, when the temperature hit 103 degrees, and a man known only as Breaker came rumbling down Maple Street on a Harley that was about to die. The Tuesday that changed everything started like any other. Zora had spent the morning at school, endured another cafeteria lunch, and returned home to the familiar quiet of her empty house. Her father wouldn't be back until after midnight. Double shifts at the plant this week. The heat had settled over Montebello like a heavy blanket. the kind of oppressive warmth that made even the neighborhood cats seek shade instead of adventure. At exactly 3:47 p.m., Zora remembered checking her watch. The distant growl of a motorcycle engine broke the afternoon stillness. This wasn't unusual. Bikes passed through occasionally. But this engine sounded different. It coughed, sputtered, then made a sound like metal tearing, a mechanical death rattle that ended in silence. Zora wheeled herself to the edge of her porch for a better view. Half a block down, a massive Harley-Davidson had stalled. Even from this distance, the rider's cut was unmistakable. The winged skull death's head patch of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club stood out against black leather. The red and white colors a warning sign as clear as any rattlesnake's pattern. The effect on the neighborhood was immediate. Mrs. Delgado, who had been watering her roses across the street, suddenly remembered something inside. The Rodriguez twins, always playing basketball in their driveway after school, were whisked indoors by their grandmother. Window blinds lowered, doors locked with audible clicks. The biker kicked his stand down and dismounted, his movements sharp with frustration. He yanked off his helmet, revealing a face that belonged on a wanted poster. Weathered, scarred, framed by a gray beard streaked with sweat. He kicked the bike's tire, then bent to examine something in the engine, muttering words Zora could guess were not prayers. The thermometer outside her window read 103 degrees. The asphalt was so hot it created visible heat waves rising like ghosts. The man straightened up and wiped his forehead with a bandana. His face flushed an alarming shade of red. He swayed slightly. Zora recognized the signs of heat exhaustion from her first aid training. The man was in trouble, possibly serious trouble. She glanced around the deserted street. No one was coming out to help. No one would. Not your problem, she whispered to herself, unconsciously echoing what she knew her neighbors were thinking. She turned to go inside, then stopped. Her mother's voice came to her, clear as if she were standing there. The measure of a person isn't what they do when it's easy. Zora sat in her chair, fingers gripping the wheels tightly as she debated with herself. The rational part of her brain listed all the reasons to stay put. He's a Hell's Angel. He's huge. He's a stranger. This isn't your business. The other part, the part that sounded like her mother, asked simpler questions. Is he human? Is he suffering? Can you help? Damn it, Zora muttered, turning her chair and wheeling back into the house. She rolled to the refrigerator, grabbed the coldest bottle of water from the back, and headed for the front door. As she navigated down her ramp, she tried not to think about the stories she'd heard about the motorcycle club, the FBI classifications, the criminal histories, the territorial violence that occasionally made the evening news. The journey down her block felt longer than usual, the sun beating down mercilessly. As she approached, the man looked up, his eyes narrowing. Up close, he was even more intimidating. 6'4" at least, with arms like tree trunks covered in faded tattoos. The number 81 was inked prominently on his bicep. H and A, the 8th and 1st letters of the alphabet. Hell's Angels. His face was a map of hard years, with a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. His eyes, pale blue and cold as winter ice, assessed her with the calculation of someone who had learned early that survival meant seeing threats before they saw you. Despite the sweat pouring down his face, his hand rested near his hip, not quite casual. Zora noticed, but kept rolling forward until she was about 10 feet away. Close enough to talk, far enough to retreat if necessary. "You need some water?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. She held out the bottle. He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to her wheelchair, then to the bottle. His expression wasn't pity. Zora knew that look well enough to recognize its absence. This was something else. Suspicion, calculation, the wariness of a man who'd never been offered anything without a hidden cost. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice like gravel underfoot. Zora hadn't expected the question. The honesty in it disarmed her planned response. She found herself smiling slightly. "For you not to die of heat stroke on my street," she said. "It's bad for property values." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe a reluctant amusement. The tension in his shoulders eased a fraction. He reached out and took the bottle, his calloused hand engulfing it completely. Their fingers didn't touch, but Zora felt the heat radiating from him even at that distance. He twisted the cap off and drank deeply, draining half the bottle in long, desperate gulps. Water trickled down his beard. When he lowered the bottle, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes never leaving her face. "Bikes flooded," he said roughly, "and I'm in the wrong damn neighborhood." The words carried weight beyond mechanical problems. Montebello had become contested territory in recent years. The Mongols' MC considered it theirs now. A Hell's Angel here wasn't just lost. He was in enemy territory. "My dad has a toolkit in the garage," Zora offered, gesturing back toward her house. "And you can sit on the porch, in the shade, while you wait for it to cool down." He studied her with that same unreadable expression, as if trying to decode a message written in a language he only partially understood. Finally, he spoke again. "Name's Breaker," he said. It wasn't offered casually. It felt like information that carried weight, like a test to see what she'd do with it. "Zora," she replied simply. He nodded once, finished the water, and crushed the plastic bottle in one large fist. He didn't take her up on the tools, but he did move his bike to the slim patch of shade cast by her neighbor's oak tree. He sat on the curb, his back against the tree trunk, watching the street with the alertness of a sentinel. 20 minutes passed in silence, broken only by distant traffic and the buzz of cicadas. Zora had wheeled back to her porch, but hadn't gone inside. Something told her that leaving felt wrong, not because she feared what he might do, but because the encounter felt unfinished somehow. Without warning, Breaker stood and walked to his motorcycle. He kicked the starter, and the Harley roared to life with a sound like contained thunder. He swung his leg over the seat and settled his weight onto the bike. Before pulling away, he looked at Zora one last time. Instead of speaking, he gave her a single sharp nod, a gesture containing volumes in its simplicity. Recognition, respect, a debt acknowledged. Then he was gone. The sound of his departure echoing down the street, long after he'd vanished from sight. Zora sat on her porch until the silence settled back around her. The entire exchange had lasted less than half an hour, but as she wheeled herself back inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred. A pebble dropped into still water, ripples expanding outward in ways she couldn't yet see. The next day dawned with an innocence that would later seem cruel. Zora woke to sunlight streaming through her window, the prisms casting their familiar rainbows across her wall. She dressed, ate breakfast, and caught the 7:15 bus to school just like any other Wednesday. The encounter with Breaker felt almost dreamlike in the morning light, a strange interlude already fading from memory. By afternoon, she was at her kitchen table, sketching designs for a new accessibility ramp for the local library. The current one was too steep, forcing wheelchair users to navigate a dangerous incline or find another entrance altogether. Zora's pencil moved confidently across the paper, creating gentle slopes and calculated curves. This was her element, solving problems others didn't even notice. The first vibration was so subtle she almost missed it. A faint trembling in her water glass, like a distant truck passing. She paused, pencil hovering above paper, listening. Nothing. She resumed drawing. Then it came again, stronger this time. The water in her glass formed perfect concentric circles, like ripples from a stone dropped in a pond. Her first thought was earthquake, but California tremors didn't sound like distant thunder. The rumble grew, building from background noise to something impossible to ignore. It wasn't the sound of one motorcycle, or even a dozen. This was something else entirely. A mechanical stampede approaching from the east. Zora set her pencil down and wheeled to the front window. The noise was louder now, a crescendo of engines that made the glass panes vibrate in their frames. Her chest tightened with an intuition she couldn't explain. Something was coming, something connected to yesterday. She pulled open the door and rolled onto her porch just as the first motorcycles appeared at the end of her street. The lead bike slowed, turning the corner with deliberate precision. Behind them came more, and more, and more. They weren't Harleys like breakers. These were a mix, Suzukis, Kawasaki's, Indians. But what united them were the riders. Each wore the black and white colors of the Mongols Motorcycle Club, their patches prominently displaying the caricature of Genghis Khan astride a motorcycle, sword raised high. The first 10 bikes passed her house, then 20, then 50. They didn't keep going. Instead, they formed a perimeter, creating a wall of chrome and leather that blocked both ends of her street. Engines idled in a menacing chorus, the combined rumble making conversation impossible. Exhaust fumes rose in the hot air, creating a haze that shimmered above the asphalt. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, their faces pale ovals of fear. Mrs. Delgado clutched her rosary beads. The Rodriguez family huddled together in their living room, visible through their picture window. No one stepped outside. No one called out. The street had become a stage, and everyone knew the performance was for Zora alone. She counted bikes until she lost track somewhere past 100. They kept coming, an army on wheels, their numbers absurd for a residential neighborhood, their presence a clear message of overwhelming force. When the last motorcycle took its place, the street had transformed. What had been a quiet suburban block was now a sea of leather-clad men, their bikes forming perfect rows, their helmeted faces turned toward Zora's small beige house. The silence that followed the cutting of engines was almost worse than the noise, a vacuum filled with unspoken threat. From the center of this mechanical ocean, a single figure dismounted. Unlike many of the others, he wore no helmet. His hair was cropped close to his scalp, emphasizing the sharp angles of his face. A long, thin scar bisected his left eyebrow, giving him a perpetually questioning expression. His cut identified him as the president of the local chapter, the patches carefully arranged to communicate his rank to those who understood the language. He moved with the controlled grace of a predator, each step purposeful as he approached Zora's lawn. 2 other patched members flanked him, walking 3 steps behind, lieutenants to his general. The rest remained with their bikes, a visible reminder of the forces at his command. Zora's mouth went dry. Her heart hammered against her ribs with such force she was sure it was visible through her t-shirt. Her palms grew slick on her wheelchair's push rims. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat inside, to lock the door, to hide. Instead, she rolled forward to the edge of her porch, her chin lifted, her back straight. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford now. Panic would only make things worse. The man stopped at the edge of her lawn, his boots planted firmly on the sidewalk. Up close, he was smaller than Breaker, perhaps 5'10", but he carried an aura of authority that made his physical size irrelevant. His eyes were dark and unreadable, his mouth a thin line beneath a carefully trimmed goatee. "We need to talk," he called out, his voice carrying across the 20 feet that separated them. It wasn't a request. Zora's throat constricted. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice to remain steady. "You're on my property," she replied, loud enough to be heard but not shouting. "You can talk from there." A murmur ran through the crowd of bikers. The man's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. He was not accustomed to conditions being placed on his demands. For a tense moment, he simply stared at her, as if reevaluating his approach. "My name is Cuchillo," he said finally. I'm president of the Mongols MC, East Lost Chapter. He gestured around him. These are my brothers. This is our territory. Zora said nothing, waiting. Stating the obvious was a power move, an attempt to establish dominance through territory. Her silence forced him to continue. Yesterday, Cuchillo said, his voice hardening, you were seen giving aid to an enemy, a Hell's Angel, in our territory. So that was it. Not gratitude for helping someone in distress. An accusation. I gave a man a bottle of water, Zora replied, the words coming easier now that she understood the charge. He was overheated. I didn't ask to see his club membership card. A few of the bikers shifted uncomfortably. Cuchillo's face remained impassive. In Southern California, you don't need to, he snapped. His patch is a declaration of war. Anyone who helps him is choosing a side. He took a step forward, one polished boot touching her lawn. We don't like spies in Montebello. The word hung in the air between them, absurd and deadly. The atmosphere shifted, the tension ratcheting higher. Behind Cuchillo, engines revved in support, the sound like growling beasts. I'm on one side, Zora said, meeting his gaze without flinching. The human side. A man was in distress. I helped him. That's the beginning and the end of the story. A muscle twitched in Cuchillo's jaw. That's not how this works, he said, taking another step onto her lawn. Behind him, his lieutenants tensed, ready to follow. You brought a snake into our yard. Now we have to burn the yard down. The threat was unmistakable. In the language of their world, her home, possibly her life, was forfeit. Around Cuchillo, the sea of bikers waited for his signal, hundreds of men poised to deliver whatever punishment he deemed appropriate. Zora felt a curious calm settle over her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but alongside it was something else, a clarity that cut through the chaos. Her mother had always said that character wasn't built in crisis. It was merely revealed. My father will be home in 6 hours, she said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. If something happens to me or our home, he'll know who's responsible. He'll go to the police, and they'll come for you. All of you. It wasn't a threat so much as a statement of fact. The calm in her voice made it more powerful than any shouting could have. The police don't scare us, Cuchillo said, but there was a new calculation in his eyes. Maybe not, Zora agreed. But they'll come. And keep coming. And you know what happens when cops start looking too closely at your business. She gestured to the street full of bikers. Is that worth the price of a bottle of water? For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. 350 men waited for the word of one. Cuchillo stared at Zora, his expression unreadable, the scar above his eye catching the afternoon light. Then, from the east end of the street, came a new sound. Different engines, approaching fast. The distinctive growl of Harley V-twins cutting through the silence with urgent purpose. Every head turned. Every body tensed. The Mongols nearest the street barrier shifted formation, hands moving toward concealed weapons. Cuchillo's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. When he looked back at Zora, his expression had transformed from threatening to coldly furious. You called them, he hissed. It wasn't a question. Zora's confusion was genuine. Called who? But Cuchillo was already striding back toward his bike, barking orders to his men. The formation shifted, creating a wall of bodies and machines facing east. The tension in the air changed from threatening to electric, the charge before lightning strikes. Through the gap between houses, Zora saw them. A smaller group of motorcycles approaching, maybe 20 or 30 at most. At their center rode a familiar figure. Even at this distance, she recognized the massive silhouette. Breaker. The HELLS Angels approached in a tight formation, their bikes moving as a single unit. Unlike the overwhelming numbers of the Mongols, they rode in a compact wedge, a fighter squadron rather than an occupying army. At the point of this formation was Breaker, his massive frame unmistakable even at a distance. They came without hesitation, their engines screaming defiance as they approached the wall of Mongols blocking the street. 350 against 25. The math was brutal in its simplicity. Zora felt her breath catch. This wasn't just uneven odds, it was suicide. No rational person would ride into those numbers. Yet here they were, a small island of red and white patches in a sea of black and white, slowing to a stop at the eastern edge of the street. The Mongols shifted, their formation tightening. Hands disappeared inside cuts, reaching for weapons that weren't technically there, but everyone knew existed. The afternoon sun glinted off chrome and mirrored sunglasses, creating a kaleidoscope of reflected light across the pavement. Breaker dismounted first, his movements unhurried despite the tension crackling in the air. He removed his helmet and hung it on his handlebar with deliberate care. His gray beard was neatly trimmed today, his face composed. He looked like a man arriving for a business meeting, not a potential massacre. He walked forward alone, entering the narrow gap between the front line of Mongols and Zora's house. The silence was absolute. No bird calls, no distant traffic, not even the rustle of wind through leaves. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. Breaker stopped in the middle of this no-man's land, planted his feet shoulder-width apart, and looked directly at Cuchillo. He didn't acknowledge the hundreds of hostile eyes watching his every move. He didn't glance at the hands hovering near concealed weapons. His focus was singular. "Cuchillo," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. "This doesn't involve her." He jerked his chin toward Zora on her porch. "This is our business." Cuchillo stepped forward, separating himself from his lieutenants. A cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth. "It involves her now, Breaker. She picked her side when she gave you water." His voice was almost conversational, as if they were discussing a minor disagreement. "You know the rules. You were in our territory." He shrugged, a theatrical gesture of helplessness. "She's your problem now." Breaker's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. A subtle coiling of potential energy. "That's right," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "She is. I took water from her. A debt was made." He paused, letting the words hang in the air between them. "You touch her. You touch her house. You're not just starting a war with us." Another pause, heavy with meaning. "You're violating a code that's older than both our clubs." The statement landed like a stone in still water, ripples of reaction spreading through the assembled bikers. Murmurs broke out among the Mongols. A few exchanged glances. The invocation of the code, that unwritten set of rules that governed their world, had shifted the terrain of the confrontation. Breaker turned slightly, his eyes finding Zora on the porch. "The girl is a civilian," he continued, his voice carrying to every ear on the street. "She acted with honor." "Are you telling me the Mongol nation has no honor?" The challenge was unmistakable, a verbal gauntlet thrown down with the precision of a man who knew exactly which pressure points to strike. Cuchillo's face darkened. He was being maneuvered into a corner in front of his own men. To harm a civilian who had offered help, especially after being called out on it, would be a stain on their reputation. But to back down after making a threat was weakness. In their world, weakness invited challenge. Cuchillo stepped closer until only 5 feet separated him from Breaker. "You've got some nerve," he said, voice tight with controlled rage. "Rolling into our territory yesterday, then bringing your crew back today. The girl might be a civilian, but she's on our turf. Actions have consequences." "Yes," Breaker agreed, "they do." His calm was unnerving in its completeness. "That's why I'm here. She gave me water when I was in trouble. Now she's in trouble. He spread his hands, a gesture encompassing both their situation and the larger principles at stake. A debt's a debt. That's the code, same as it's always been. The two men stared at each other, neither willing to yield. Behind them, hundreds of bikers waited for the signal that would unleash chaos. The angels were grotesquely outnumbered, yet they sat on their bikes with the stoic acceptance of men who had made peace with their choices. They had come knowing the odds. They had come anyway. Zora watched from her porch, understanding washing over her in waves. Breaker and his brothers hadn't come expecting to win a fight. They had come to die if necessary, to pay a debt of honor with their lives. The realization made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. "Look around you," Cuchillo said, gesturing to his assembled force. "You really want to die over a bottle of water?" Breaker didn't blink. "I've died for less." He shifted his weight slightly, hands loose at his sides. "But this isn't about water. It's about respect. It's about a civilian who did the right thing when no one else would." His voice hardened. "It's about whether we're still men of our word, or just thugs with patches." Another ripple moved through the crowd of Mongols. Some of the older members nodded almost imperceptibly. The code Breaker invoked wasn't just angel law, it transcended club boundaries. It was the foundation upon which their entire culture was built. Cuchillo sensed the shift in his ranks. His eyes narrowed, calculating new angles, reassessing risks. He turned his head slightly, looking past Breaker to where Zora sat on her porch. For the first time he truly saw her, not as a pawn or an obstacle, but as a person. He saw the wheelchair and the defiant set of her jaw. He saw someone who had faced her own battles long before today. "The girl has courage," he said finally, a reluctant admission. "Not many would stand their ground with 300 Mongols on their lawn." "No," Breaker agreed. "Not many would." A long moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken calculations. Cuchillo was trapped by his own rhetoric, by the threat he had made in front of witnesses. To back down now would cost him face. To press forward would violate principles that even outlaws respected. "You said she gave you water," Cuchillo said suddenly. "Nothing else? No messages? No packages?" "Just water," Breaker confirmed. "She saw a man in trouble and helped. That's all." Cuchillo studied Breaker's face, searching for deception. Finding none, he glanced again at Zora, then back to the small contingent of angels waiting at the end of the street. Their willingness to ride into certain death for a principle spoke volumes. The Mongol president straightened his shoulders. Decision made. "We're done here," he announced, his voice carrying to his assembled brothers. With a sharp, almost imperceptible jerk of his chin, he gave the order. He turned his back on Breaker, a calculated insult and dismissal, and walked to his motorcycle. One by one, engines roared to life, creating a wall of sound that vibrated through the pavement. The Mongols began to move, their tight formation dissolving as they turned their bikes around. They didn't leave all at once, but in small groups, some casting final glances at the angels, others looking curiously at Zora on her porch. A few of the older members nodded to Breaker as they passed, a warrior's acknowledgement of a standoff well navigated. Within 5 minutes, the street was nearly empty. The last to leave was Cuchillo himself. He paused before starting his engine, looking directly at Zora. "You picked dangerous friends, girl," he called out, his voice carrying across the now quiet street. "I didn't pick anyone," Zora replied steadily. "I just did what was right." Something like respect flickered across Cuchillo's face. "Yeah," he said, almost to himself. "That's the problem." He kicked his bike to life and rode away without looking back, the sound of his departure fading into the distance. And then they were gone. Where minutes before had been an army of motorcycles, now there was only empty pavement shimmering in the late afternoon heat. The only evidence of their presence was the lingering smell of exhaust and the tire marks on the asphalt. Breaker's smaller group remained. He walked his bike forward until he stood at the curb in front of Zora's house. The other angels kept their distance, forming a loose perimeter at both ends of the street, giving their leader and the girl privacy for whatever words needed to be exchanged. Breaker looked up at Zora, his weathered face etched with a weariness that seemed to go beyond physical exhaustion. For the first time, she noticed gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of hard living. "You shouldn't have done it," he said, but there was no anger in his voice. "I know," Zora replied quietly. "A debt's a debt," he continued, nodding once. "It's paid." He looked down the empty street where the Mongols had disappeared. "But you should know, this kind of thing, it leaves a mark. They won't forget." He looked back at her, his pale blue eyes serious. "We won't either." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. In their world, being remembered could be a blessing or a curse, sometimes both. Breaker didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. The fact that he and 24 of his brothers had ridden into what could have been certain death was thanks enough. It was a statement of honor, a repayment made in the only currency his world valued. He swung his leg over his Harley, settled his weight on the seat, and nodded once more to Zora. Without another word, he signaled to his men. They roared away as a unit, their formation tight and disciplined to the last, leaving Zora alone on her porch in the sudden, shocking quiet. The neighborhood slowly came back to life around her. Doors opened cautiously. Mrs. Delgado peered out from behind her curtains. The Rodriguez twins ventured onto their driveway, looking up and down the street as if expecting the bikers to materialize again. Zora took a deep breath, the air thick with the ghost of gasoline and tension. Her hands trembled slightly on her wheelchair's rims, the delayed reaction of adrenaline leaving her system. Her simple act of kindness had rippled through a world she never knew existed, and for a moment it had bent its brutal rules. She didn't know if it had made anything better. She didn't know what consequences might still come, but as she wheeled herself back into her house, she knew with absolute certainty that she would do it again. It was, after all, who she chose to be. 3 days passed before Zora saw Breaker again. The weekend had arrived with its usual rhythm. Her father home for once, neighbors gradually returning to their routines, the incident becoming something spoken about in hushed tones behind closed doors. No police had come asking questions. No reporters had called. It was as if the confrontation had happened in a parallel world, one that touched theirs only briefly before retreating back into shadow. Zora was on her porch again, watering her succulents, when the familiar rumble of a single Harley approached. This time, neighbors didn't rush inside. They watched openly, curious rather than afraid. The monster that comes alone is less frightening than the army that surrounds you. Breaker parked at the curb and dismounted, removing his helmet with practiced ease. He wore the same leather cut, but his manner was different, less guarded, his movements more fluid. He approached the bottom of Zora's ramp and stopped, looking up at her with those pale blue eyes that missed nothing. "Got a minute?" he asked. Zora set her watering can down and nodded. "Sure." He climbed the ramp slowly, not out of physical difficulty, but with the deliberate care of someone respecting another's space. He settled into the porch chair next to her wheelchair, a chair usually occupied by her father on quiet evenings. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the pause between movements in a symphony, necessary and purposeful. "Your dad know what happened?" Breaker finally asked. "Yes," Zora replied. "I told him everything." Breaker nodded, unsurprised. "He angry?" "Not at me." She looked at him directly. "He said my mom would have done the same thing." A ghost of a smile touched Breaker's weathered face. "Sounds like a good woman." She was. Another silence, this one filled with the weight of absent loved ones. Somewhere down the street, children laughed, the sound carrying on the warm air. "You know why I came back?" Breaker asked, his voice low. Zora shook her head. "To tell you that what happened the other day, that wasn't normal." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking out at the quiet street. "In our world, civilians stay civilians. They don't get involved. They don't get remembered." He turned to look at her again. "But you're remembered now." The words weren't a threat, but they carried weight nonetheless. "What does that mean?" Zora asked. Breaker considered his answer carefully. "It means different things to different people. To Cuchillo and his crew, it might mean they keep an eye on this street, make sure no one messes with you." He shrugged slightly. "Or it might mean they steer clear entirely, not wanting the complication." "And to you? To your club?" His eyes held hers. "It means a debt was paid, but a story remains." He gestured with one large hand, encompassing the street, the neighborhood, the invisible territories that divided their city. "Most people live their whole lives in this world, without understanding there's another one running alongside it. One with different rules, different consequences. Different honor," Zora added softly. Breaker nodded, something like respect flickering across his face. "Yeah, different honor." He straightened in his chair. "The thing is, what you did, giving water to a stranger without asking who he was or what colors he wore, that wouldn't make sense in my world. In my world, you always ask those questions first." "And yet," Zora said, 25 of you were ready to die for someone who didn't ask." A long moment passed as Breaker absorbed her words. When he spoke again, his voice carried an emotion she hadn't heard before, something almost like wonder. "That's the thing that's been keeping me up at night," he admitted. "Trying to figure out how a 17-year-old girl in a wheelchair had more courage than most men I've known my whole life." He shook his head slowly. "More honor too, maybe." Zora felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "It wasn't courage," she said. "It was just being human. Maybe that's the same thing sometimes." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street, the same street that days earlier had been filled with the machinery of potential violence. "You ever wonder," Breaker asked suddenly, "what would have happened if you'd just stayed inside that day? If you'd looked out your window and thought, 'Not my problem'?" Zora had wondered exactly that, lying awake at night replaying the events in her mind. "I'd have been safer," she acknowledged, "but I wouldn't have been me." Breaker nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. "Choices make us who we are," he said, "not circumstances." The words echoed what her mother had taught her, that kindness wasn't about choosing who was worthy of it, but about choosing who you wanted to be. "Your mom," Breaker said, rising to his feet, "she'd be proud of you, not because everything turned out okay, but because when it mattered, you chose right, even when it was hard." He looked down at her, his expression solemn. "That's rare, Zora, rarer than you know." He descended the ramp with the same careful steps he'd used coming up. At the bottom, he turned back. "I won't be coming around again," he said, not unkindly. "Better for you that way. But I want you to know something. What happened here, it's being told. In clubhouses across the state, they're talking about the girl who offered water without asking questions, and how the code still means something." With that, he mounted his bike, started the engine, and with a final nod, rode away. This time, Zora knew he wouldn't return. Some stories aren't meant to have sequels. As dusk settled over Montebello, Zora remained on her porch, thinking about ripples, how one small action could spread outward in ways impossible to predict. Her bottle of water had set in motion events that could have ended in tragedy, but instead had affirmed something essential about humanity. Not every act of kindness would face such a test. Not every decision would balance on the edge of danger. But every choice, no matter how small, revealed character, both to others and to yourself. So what about you? What choices define who you are? When was the last time you helped someone when it would have been easier, safer to look away? When did you last stand by your principles, even when they came with a cost? The truth is, we all face these moments every day. They rarely involve motorcycle clubs or dramatic standoffs. Usually, they're quiet decisions, to speak up or stay silent, to extend a hand or turn away, to choose courage over comfort. If this story touched something in you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that their everyday choices matter. Drop a comment about a time when you chose kindness despite the consequences. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today, because in the end, that's what connects us all. Not the circumstances we're given, but the choices we make when those circumstances test who we truly are. When Zora Washington offered water to a stranded HELLS angel, she had no idea she was about to challenge the unwritten laws of a world few of us will ever know. She didn't set out to be brave. She didn't plan to stand up to hundreds of bikers. She simply chose kindness when everyone else chose fear. And that choice, that one small bottle of water, did something remarkable. It forced hardened men who lived by codes of violence and territory to remember their humanity. It made them question rules they'd followed for decades. It bent an iron law that seemed unbreakable. That's the power we all have, every single day. We might not face an army of Mongols on our front lawn, but we all face moments where doing the right thing feels risky, where helping someone might cost us something, where standing up for what's right means standing alone. Zora's story reminds us that the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest ripples, that one person's courage can change the rules of the game, that sometimes all it takes to transform a situation is someone brave enough to be human when everyone else has forgotten how. So now I want to hear from you. Has a simple act of kindness ever brought unexpected consequences into your life? Have you ever helped someone and found yourself changed by the experience? Share your story in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear exactly what you have to say. If this story touched your heart, do 3 things for me right now. First, smash that like button to tell YouTube this is the content you want to see more of. Second, hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell because we've got more incredible American stories coming your way. Next week, we'll meet a homeless veteran who saved a billionaire's life during a random mugging, and how that moment transformed both their worlds forever. Finally, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their everyday choices matter. Maybe it's a friend going through a tough time. Maybe it's your teenager who's learning what kind of person they want to be. Maybe it's someone who's forgotten the power they have to change the world around them, one small act at a time. Because that's what these stories are all about. Reminding us that in a world that can sometimes feel dark and divided, ordinary people like Zora Washington, and like you, have the power to light the way forward, one act of courage at a time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.